In the quiet suburbs of 1950s Cleveland, a brutal murder would tear apart not just one family, but the very fabric of American justice itself. What began as a simple case of domestic violence would evolve into something far more sinister, revealing layers of deception that continue to haunt investigators decades later. But first, don't miss out. Subscribe for regular doses of the unexplained. It was July 4th, 1954, in the early hours before dawn, when the tranquil lakefront community of Bay Village, Ohio, was shattered by events that would challenge everything the authorities thought they understood about crime and punishment. The Sheppard household on West Lake Road sat peacefully along the shores of Lake Erie, a two-story colonial home that had witnessed countless family gatherings and quiet domestic moments. Dr. Samuel Sheppard claimed he had fallen asleep on the living room couch while watching television with his pregnant wife, Marilyn. Their 7-year-old son, Chip, slept soundly in his bedroom upstairs. The scene appeared ordinary, domestic, unremarkable in every way that mattered. According to the official police report, Dr. Sheppard awakened to the sound of his wife's screams echoing through the house. He rushed upstairs to their bedroom, where he encountered what he described as a white-haired intruder standing over Marilyn's motionless form. The struggle that followed would leave the doctor unconscious and his wife dead from 35 devastating blows to the head. Marilyn Sheppard, 4 months pregnant, lay in a pool of blood that had soaked through the mattress and pooled on the hardwood floor beneath. The brutality of the attack suggested a rage that went far beyond robbery or random violence. Her pajama top had been pulled upward, exposing her chest, though investigators found no evidence of sexual assault. The crime scene itself presented a puzzle that would perplex forensic experts for decades. Blood spatter patterns covered the walls in ways that seemed to defy the doctor's account of events. The killer had struck with such force that fragments of bone and tissue were embedded in the bedroom ceiling. Yet somehow, young Chip had slept through the entire ordeal undisturbed in his nearby room. Dr. Sheppard's injuries told their own confusing story. He suffered a fractured vertebra, a concussion, and various bruises that appeared consistent with a violent struggle. However, these wounds raised more questions than they answered. How had an intruder inflicted such specific damage while leaving the doctor alive? Why had the attacker fled without ensuring his only witness was silenced? The investigation took an unexpected turn when detectives discovered that several items were missing from the Sheppard home. Dr. Sheppard's medical bag, his wristwatch, and a leather jacket had vanished without explanation. The missing watch would become particularly significant when investigators found disturbed sand and vegetation along the lakefront, suggesting someone had descended the steep bluff behind the house. Local authorities initially treated the case as a straightforward home invasion, but inconsistencies in the physical evidence began to emerge. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. Windows remained intact and locked from the inside. The intruder had apparently materialized within the house itself, committed murder, battled the doctor, and vanished into the night without leaving a single fingerprint. 3 weeks after the murder, the Cleveland Press published a front-page editorial demanding to know why Dr. Sheppard had not been arrested. The headline read simply, "Why no inquest? Do it now, Dr. Gerber." The editorial campaign that followed would transform a local crime into a national obsession, with newspapers across the country demanding justice for the murdered woman and her unborn child. The media circus that descended upon Bay Village brought with it disturbing revelations about the Sheppard marriage. Uncovered evidence of the doctor's extramarital affairs, including a relationship with Susan Hayes, a former laboratory technician at the hospital where he worked. The revelation painted Dr. Sheppard as a man with motives that extended far beyond what the public had been told. As the investigation deepened, more puzzling details emerged from the crime scene analysis. The murder weapon was never recovered, despite extensive searches of the house, grounds, and surrounding lake. Forensic experts determined that the killer had used something heavy and blunt, possibly a surgical instrument, which would have been readily available in the doctor's medical bag. The blood evidence presented the most confounding aspect of the entire case. Analysts found that the spatter patterns were inconsistent with a single attacker striking from one position. The blood had been cast in multiple directions, suggesting either multiple assailants or a killer who had moved around the victim during the prolonged assault. Most disturbing of all, investigators discovered a small blood stain on the basement stairs that appeared to have been made by someone walking down from the scene of the crime. Dr. Sheppard's behavior in the hours following the murder raised additional concerns among investigators. He had called his neighbor, the mayor of Bay Village, before contacting police. He had also telephoned his brother, Dr. Stephen Sheppard, who arrived at the scene and moved freely through the house before authorities could secure it properly. These actions suggested either shock and confusion or a deliberate attempt to contaminate evidence. The coroner's inquest, held under intense media scrutiny, revealed testimony that would haunt the case for decades. Dr. Sheppard's account of the night's events contained subtle inconsistencies that prosecutors would later exploit. He claimed to have chased the intruder to the lakefront, where he was struck unconscious a second time. Yet when he regained consciousness, he found himself partially submerged in the lake with his wallet missing, but his valuable watch still on his wrist. The missing watch became a central piece of evidence when investigators discovered it had been found by Dr. Sheppard's brother in the doctor's medical bag days after the murder. The watch showed damage consistent with being struck against a hard surface, but the circumstances of its recovery raised questions about tampering with evidence. How had the watch traveled from the lakefront back to the medical bag without the doctor's knowledge? Local residents began reporting strange occurrences in the weeks following the murder. Several witnesses claimed to have seen unfamiliar figures lurking near the Sheppard property in the days before the attack. A bus driver reported picking up a disheveled man with scratches on his face near Lake Erie on the morning after the murder. These sightings suggested the possibility of an unknown assailant, but police were unable to locate or identify any of the mysterious figures. The most chilling discovery came when investigators found a trail of blood leading from the bedroom to the back door of the house. The trail was faint but detectable, suggesting someone had attempted to clean it up. More disturbing still, the blood trail contained two distinct patterns, indicating that someone had walked through the house twice, once going toward the bedroom and once departing from it. The trial of Dr. Samuel Sheppard began in October 1954 amid a media frenzy that would later be cited as an example of how publicity can corrupt the justice system. The prosecution presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, extramarital affairs, and the absence of any credible alternative suspect. The defense struggled to explain the inconsistencies in the doctor's story while maintaining his innocence. During the trial, new evidence emerged that had not been available to the initial investigators. A forensic expert testified that the blood spatter patterns were consistent with left-handed blows, while Dr. Sheppard was right-handed. This revelation suggested either that the doctor had deliberately used his non-dominant hand to mislead investigators or that someone else had committed the murder. The most disturbing testimony came from the coroner, who revealed that Marilyn Sheppard's injuries were so severe that she would have been rendered unconscious after the first few blows. The killer had continued the assault for several minutes after she was no longer capable of resistance. This level of sustained violence suggested a personal hatred that went beyond robbery or even eliminating a witness. The jury deliberated for 4 days before returning a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. Dr. Sheppard was sentenced to life in prison, but the case was far from over. Appeals would continue for years, raising questions about the fairness of the trial and the adequacy of the investigation. In 1966, the Supreme Court overturned Dr. Sheppard's conviction, citing the carnival atmosphere that had surrounded the trial. A new trial was ordered, and this time the defense presented evidence that had been overlooked or suppressed during the original proceedings. The most significant revelation was the identification of Richard Eberling, a window washer who had worked in the Sheppard home and had a history of theft and violence. Eberling's involvement in the case added layers of complexity that investigators are still unraveling today. He had been questioned briefly after the murder, but was dismissed as a suspect despite having cuts on his hands and a criminal record. Decades later, DNA evidence would link him to the crime scene in ways that the original investigators never imagined. The retrial in 1966 resulted in Dr. Sheppard's acquittal, but the case had already consumed his life and reputation. He died in 1970 at the age of 46, never having fully recovered from the ordeal. His son, Chip, would spend decades trying to clear his father's name and uncover the truth about his mother's murder. The final revelation came in 1998, when DNA testing was performed on evidence that had been preserved from the original crime scene. The results showed genetic material from multiple individuals, including profiles that matched neither Dr. Sheppard nor his wife. The presence of unknown DNA at the scene supported the theory that an intruder had indeed entered the house that night, but it also raised new questions about how many people had been involved in the crime. What do you think really happened in that lakefront house on that summer night in 1954? Subscribe for more cases that challenge everything we think we know about truth and justice.